when choosing a GPU for DaVinci Resolve, it might not be as simple as you think. NVIDIA, Intel, and AMD? Well, in this video I'm going to show you exactly which GPUs are the best for DaVinci Resolve and which ones should you get and which ones you shouldn't. Let's go. Super excited to announce that this video is sponsored by Artlist, something that we've been using for years, and now they're sponsoring this video. So check them out in the video description below, or more about them later on in this video. Now in a moment you're going to see absolutely ton of benchmarks and results on the screen, but if you do want to pick up any of the GPUs that I'm talking about, I'm going to leave the links in the description below so you can get the right ones there. Also in the description you can find my test bench setup so you can check out what's the equipment that I'm actually testing. What about the CPU, RAM and other bits? Well, it's down there. So the results that we're talking about here are done with the TESTBENCH benchmark, and TESTBENCH tests the extended and standard overall scores, 4K, 8K, GPU-FX and Fusion scores, and we're going to dive deeper into those scores individually. But one of the main things important to note here is that I have tested with DaVinci Resolve Studio, not the free version. So if you are using the free version, then you've got to know that there is quite a big restriction on the free. So before thinking about even upgrading your GPU, do yourself a favor and upgrade your DaVinci Resolve to Studio, because that will actually give you a big performance increase with your current hardware that you're using, because the Studio version releases all the hardware and starts to use all the hardware. If you do want to save some money, try to find some used license or some licenses online, for example from eBay or places like that, where people have bought the DaVinci Resolve camera and actually have listed the code online because they don't need extra licenses. Another very important thing is the Intel Arc drivers. Intel is the newest guy in the GPU race, and they are releasing drivers left, right and center. And the newer drivers have quite a big performance improvement. So when you're using Intel Arc GPUs or planning to use them, I highly recommend updating your DaVinci Resolve as well as the driver to the latest version. So here I've done a little test. So I tested the A770 Arc in September 2023, whatever driver was available then, and also recently about a week ago, that is February 2024, to see what kind of performance in driver, not even software, is there. And I was using the DaVinci Resolve Studio 18.6, and you can see that the new February driver is about 20% faster in the overall scores, and Fusion score is 27.1% faster. Now GPU-FX haven't gone much faster. The 8K media score has gone massively faster, again 22%, and 4K media score a little bit. So as you can see, having an updated driver on the Arc, very, very important. And that's what you can see on some of these charts as well. The A770, that's higher than on the previous one, or higher in the chart, is the newer driver, and the one that's on the lower is the previous or older driver. So let's take a look at the extended overall score, and here we can see, oh wait a second, NVIDIA is not on the top. In fact, AMD is on the top with their much cheaper cards. The 7900 XTX and XT are topping the RTX 4090, which is very, very interesting. Now, not a lot, a few percent, but still topping it. Bear in mind, the way I'm testing this is that I have done like 5+ runs of this benchmark and calculating the average of all of these tests. If there is a very high or very low score that's completely off the about average or ballpark, then I'm taking that off just to clean up the results and making them as accurate as possible. So here you can see the extended scores. AMD is actually much better than some of the NVIDIA cards, and the cards kind of gradually go on top and higher and higher. And I've also included some of the previous generation cards, like a 3090 Ti that I've got the Zotac one, and the 3090 Asus TUF one, so you can kind of have a bit of a feel where these or older cards would go. DaVinci Resolve is one of those programs that absolutely loves to use your GPU, a lot more than Premiere Pro. So for video editing applications, the DaVinci Resolve just uses as much power as you can, but here we can see which ones are better and worse, and you know, if it's worth actually upgrading the GPU. Now you can see on the bottom there's a few cards that don't have a score. It's because they either crashed when doing the extended overall scores, or something happened that they didn't manage to complete it. So that's why there is none of these cards available there. Moving on to standard overall score. And here you can see we've got all of the cards available. And interestingly, again, The AMD cards are on top of the chart, and now actually even more than NVIDIA ones on the previous extended scores. So AMD is actually better in DaVinci Resolve than NVIDIA, especially for the price point. The 7900 XT and XTX, they're so much cheaper than the 4090, what we can see there. Even the 4080 and 4080 Super that are more expensive cards get beat by AMD. So AMD is a very interesting pick for DaVinci Resolve. In terms of the Intel cards, you can see that the A770 Predator is not very impressive in DaVinci Resolve. We're roughly about the same as a RTX 2060 Super, so that shows that there is still improvement to be made in DaVinci Resolve for the ARC cards, because the 4060 Ti is performing better, quite a bit better in fact, and the 4060 is about the same in DaVinci Resolve. But knowing that the 4060 is about the same, the price point is interesting for the ARC though, because the ARC is cheaper than the 4060. And the nice thing is that you do get double the VRAM on the ARC A770 compared to the RTX 4060. I'm so buzzing to tell you more about today's video sponsor, Artlist, which is an all-in-one platform for your content creation needs. They offer music licensing and sound effects, but now also templates, stock footage, and plugins. Artlist got hundreds of thousands of songs and sound effects, so you don't need to pay for multiple licenses to satisfy your song needs. You can be pretty confident that you'll never run out of choice on Artlist. Also, by using Artlist, you are supporting other professional artists who actually create the professional music on the site for you to use, made by creators for creators. Their universal license makes sure that you'll never get hit by a copyright strike, whether this is on social media or a Super Bowl advert. Artlist is not just a music licensing site anymore. Use the AI-powered search engine to find the B-roll that you'd need or forgot to shoot. Or install the plugin directly to your editing software and access all the assets directly and faster. And choose a licensing that fits your needs. So whether you're a solo creator or an employer who has hundreds of employees, there is a license for you. No need to pay more than you actually need. And if you use my link in the video description below, you'll get 2 months for free. Check out Artlist and all that they can offer in the video description below. Thanks very much Artlist for sponsoring this video, and back to the video. Moving on to 4K scores, and if you're wondering which codecs we're testing in this test the DaVinci is actually using, then you can see on the screens here now for 4K. So basically we're testing the resolution with few different codecs. We've got long GOP and raw codecs. And here now, interestingly, things have turned a little bit. So you can see that the NVIDIA cards, when actually working with the codec, encoding and decoding it, NVIDIA cards are better. You can see that the 4080s even are better than the 7900 XT or XTX. So AMD cards not on top of the charts right now. Now, they're not far behind. You can see only 3% slower than the RTX 4090, which most people would argue is probably worth the performance tip over the price gap between the 4090 and 7900 XT, for example. Now, we lose a little bit of VRAM, but we'll talk about that in a minute. The interesting bit for me here is the 4070 Ti Super, which performs very well in there, and with the studio drivers, you might want to get that one instead of AMD cards because it performs right on the top there, like 5% slower than the 4090, but has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, good drivers, and it's basically a baby 4080. The AMD cards still very, very strong contenders, and you can see they're quite a bit better. Interestingly, the last generation cards, the 3090 Ti and 3090, they have quite a bit of a dip there between the next kind of jump up. You can see on the graphs there is a little dip between the 4070 Super and 3090 Ti. So the newer cards kind of jump a little bit better. Now this is few percent, and this is not a massive thing, but regardless, the newer media engines on NVIDIA really help that, and we can see that in there. The previous 20 and 30 series cards, they're kind of there and not very impressive. Then on the lower down, we've got the 4060 Ti and 7600 XT, the lower end of AMD and NVIDIA cards. which kind of perform okay, nothing impressive there. And then Intel cards are right on the bottom of the pack there. Even though Intel does have killer media inside the GPU there, and arguably some of the best in the market, in here they're not getting utilized yet, which means that we can hope for a much better improvement with the driver update, which makes the Arc A770 again quite interesting. Let's look at 8K media scores now, for those who want to use a little bit of a high resolution. One of the main things here is VRAM, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you can see NVIDIA cards are on top of the charts. And here, the AMD cards are quite a bit down. In fact, if you're looking at the best AMD cards for 8K media, so that is H.265 and Red 8K media, the RX 7900 XT, it's the best what AMD can offer, actually gets beat by an RTX 4060 Ti 16GB card, this one here. That is less than half the price of that, which is very interesting and shows that not always the AMD cards are better at everything. So when actually working with some of the codecs, decoding and encoding them, exporting and playing them back on timeline, the NVIDIA cards are much better. Intel cards, again, not quite as impressive. And interestingly, the AMD cards, there's not that big of a difference between 7700 XT and 7900 XT-X. The only difference really is VRAM capacity, but here we are not gapping the VRAM capacity, so it's just interesting. Again, some of the lower end cards that have less VRAM or just crashed didn't complete this one, as you can see. But look at the difference between the new and old drivers of the A770. There's even newer drivers now out for the A770. Just before I started filming this video, there's another new driver out, so I don't know, you might get even more performance increase. So it's worth the newer drivers for the A770 because it gets more and more competitive as the time goes on, and I've never seen that before where a GPU just gets a new driver and it's even better, even better, even better. Now let's take a look at the GPU effects, which in DaVinci Resolve there's quite a few, and really you can utilize and accelerate them a lot with the GPU. Now you can see that the 4080 is getting beat by about 25% on the charts. You can see both of the 4090s that I've tested, the Asus and Zotac one, boom, quite a bit better than any of the 4080s, which is also roughly about the same as the best of AMD, the 7900 XT-X. But the XT-X still is a little bit more affordable than the 4080. Now the previous generation 3090 Ti is there next to 4080 Super and beats the RX 7900 XT a little bit, but still a little bit lower. Now, as you can see, as we go down on the cards, the graph kind of very gradually goes down. There is a big jump between the 7800 XT and 7700 XT. So you can see that the 16GB and 12GB version, there's quite a big difference in the cards there. Now, there are a few 16GB cards on the lower end there, the A770 and 4060 Ti 16GB version, but they are on the lower end of the pack. And roughly the lower end, the A770 and 7600 XT and all of them, they perform roughly about the same in the bottom there. There's not that big of a difference, but the higher end gets really big increase there. So the NVIDIA cards really take it to another level with the GPU effects. So far we can see that the 4K, 8K and the GPU effect scores, NVIDIA is the charts leader and is actually a better choice for most people. But there's one more thing, which is Fusion, the DaVinci Resolve version of After Effects basically. And when looking at that one, this is where AMD gets most of their performance win. So you can see in Fusion, the AMD cards perform absolutely insanely and get quite a big increase over the rest of the cards. The RTX 4090 is actually slower than the 7800 XT by quite a bit. We're talking about 12% slower, something like that. That's absolutely insane gap. As you can see, the top three there, 7800, 7900 XT and XT-X are on the top there by quite a big margin. Then we've got all the kind of middle pack, and which is quite big all the way down to 4070 Super and 4080 down there. Interestingly, I don't know why the Noctua 4080 is performing down there, compared to the Supers. But Fusion is kind of a mixed bag here. The A770 is not doing particularly well, but the new driver is actually kind of on par with the Palit RTX 4070 Super. Performs about the same, which is very, very interesting. A few percent difference there. So the A770, again, on the budget end, looks quite interesting. So depends what you're doing more. In Fusion, perhaps the AMD cards are worth getting. But if you do a lot of GPU effects, working with actually media, like encoding and not doing perhaps some of the graphs and what you would do in Fusion, the NVIDIA cards might be a good option to go. In the lower end, the A770 looks very interesting. Intel doesn't have any competition on the higher end or even mid-range. They're just on the lower end, that one there. But for the price point, makes a ton of sense if you want to get started in DaVinci Resolve. The other thing we want to talk about is VRAM capacity, because AMD offers quite a lot of VRAM for their price point. Like even the 7600 XT, you can get 16 gigabytes. And in the very, very low end, you get 8 gigabytes, but most of them are 12, 16, 20, and 24 gigabytes, which DaVinci Resolve loves to use. And sometimes you might actually be VRAM bottlenecked. As you start adding effects and other B-roll things, DaVinci Resolve loves to use the VRAM. It uses pretty much everything you can, as much as you can when you're using a project. In fact, what I have seen in my experience, it actually prefers VRAM over RAM. So Premiere Pro uses quite a lot of RAM, but not as much VRAM. In DaVinci Resolve, it's the other way around. You can get away with less RAM, but more VRAM is better. When you're choosing the GPU, try to get as much VRAM as possible. So for example, maybe you're looking at the 7700 XT and 7800 XT, then having that extra 4 gigabytes there is definitely worth it. Also, perhaps you're looking at the lower end 4060 Ti from NVIDIA or something like that. Highly recommend checking out the 16 gigabyte version, because just the VRAM capacity, it just adds quite a bit. Especially these ProArt cards, because if you're using Creative Cloud as well as DaVinci Resolve, you can get a few months free Creative Cloud complimentary membership with this one, which you can kind of take off the price point. Makes those ProArt cards not just absolutely amazing to look at and the design wise, but also affordable just because of the, free subscription of Adobe Creative Cloud. When you're looking at the extended overall score, you can see the cards that have 8 gigabytes and less are kind of on the lower end down there. And then the 12 plus cards getting like the mid pack, slightly kind of moving upwards toward the 16, 20 and more. But this benchmark doesn't quite cap like even the 16 gigabyte VRAM or the 20 or 24. So perhaps when you're working with 8K media, I would not go less than 20 gigabytes of VRAM, just because how DaVinci Resolve uses it. Now you can get away with 12 as well. Previously it's been completely fine, but you're most likely going to be capped with that because DaVinci Resolve will use as much of it as you can. So now, in conclusion, which cards should you be getting? Well, it depends your workflow and what you're doing more. If you're doing a lot of just working with the media and encoding and decoding, then perhaps the NVIDIA cards are the best for you. If you're doing a lot of fusion, then the AMD cards look very, very interesting there. Also, when you're looking at the price point, the AMD cards might be the best option for you. There is only one downside or caveat with the AMD cards, which is the encoder quality. It's very hard to test and actually showcase to you, but the test what you have seen online there and what we've tested with the encoder quality, for example, in OBS when you're encoding streams, which is very similar to encoding video or exporting video, you can see that the AMD cards have a lower quality at the same bitrate, which means that if you're using AMD card, I highly recommend upping the bitrate that you're exporting the video in, so that there's more room for mistakes and the encoder kind of inefficiency. But when you're doing Intel or NVIDIA cards, then you get very good high quality encoders. Now, if that's important for you, then NVIDIA might be the pick for you, but at the same time, they are quite a bit more expensive. So it depends if you want to pay for this. If you do want to pick any of these up, the links, as always, are in the description below, as well as the build guides. If you're just wanting to build yourself the best bang for buck creator PC and save a ton more money than buying a Mac, for example, then there's build guides in the video description below. Whatever your budget is, there's a video down there. If you want to see specific comparisons with any of the GPUs, I highly recommend checking out the reviews on the channel. If there's a question that you really like to get answered, you can reach out on Minect. I want to say big thanks to Artlist for sponsoring this video, so go check them out in the video description below. If you use my links, you get 2 months for free on any of the plans. And it's great to see a brand that you've been using for years now wanting to pair up with us to actually provide some more content for you guys. So super grateful for Artlist, and definitely worth checking them out. They've got an awesome service, and now a lot more than just music license inside down in the video description below. Thanks, Artlist.